Am I saying your name right? Is it Peter Kenny?
Peter Kenny, that's correct, yeah.
Great. And what year were you born in, Peter? And where are you recording from today?
I was born in 1963 and I'm recording from Wallasey on Wirral near Liverpool.
How did you get started in performing? Like, what was your journey?
Well, basically, I did. I'd always been interested in performing from an early age, school plays and things like that. I did a drama degree at the University of Hull. Subsequently, ended up working behind the scenes in building sets and scenery and designing and so on. And then got a job with a children's theatre company doing puppet theatre, TV based on a children's TV show called Button Moon. And I toured extensively with them for many years, and then from there progressed into theatre and education. Subsequently worked with a lot of touring theatre companies like Odd Socks, ANBC, went all over the world with the British Council, and then worked with the BBC Radio Drama Company. Got into doing a lot of audio, which is what I mainly do these days. And yeah, so the acting took over, and I then worked with Border Crossings and did the various tours and shows with them.
Okay. So you did drama at Hull, and you kind of you were building sets, and you made your way into puppet theater.
Yeah, basically, I mean, it's although it's a university degree, it did actually have a dedicated performers course, which I was taking. But I've always been very good with my hands at making stuff, puppets, masks, props. I ended up being trained as a carpenter and building furniture and supporting myself doing that for many years when things were a bit thin on the acting ground. And I subsequently did some diploma work at RADA and at Morley College because I also was a singer. And when I worked with Michael, a lot of the work that I was doing with him with Border Crossings was because of my voice, because I was a countertenor. And so I had this almost mezzo soprano range, and which we utilised a lot in various projects.
When did you start singing?
I'd always sung, and then I think in my teens, I don't actually remember my voice ever actually breaking, but I'm sure it must have done. And but I just gravitated towards this. I remember hearing Alfred Della and thinking, oh, and then subsequently James Bowman and others, and I went, actually, I can do that. And that's perhaps that's what I am. And I actually wrote to James Bowman, and he very kindly invited me to a studio off the back of the Wigmore Hall, and he took me through every song I've ever sung, pretty much. And his verdict: lovely noise, but you are clearly an actor who sings, not a singer. When I asked why, he said because you sing consonants and singers don't; they only sing vowels. But which is true. I mean, I was an actor first and foremost. Singing was just a sort of an adjunct, a side thing. But it got me a lot of extraordinary work with the Royal Shakespeare Company and with Michael.
Did you sing in your youth as well? Like,
Yes, yeah, I was always in school choirs and things like that. Um, I was in amateur theatre before I went to university and studied and so on. So just kept it going over the years, sang in various church choirs. I was the cantor for a second cantor for a church choir in Wimbledon for 15 years in London before I moved away. Um, Singing bass actually, not a countertenor by then, but yeah.
describe your training up until I don't know, up until graduating, I guess, from Hull. How would you describe your training?
I suppose. Well, it was we did a variety of disciplines. We studied world theatre. We also studied the classics, and we were encouraged to perform and do put our own shows together. So we would put on about 5 or 6 performances a year, and then there were lots of studio workshops where we were working on physical work. We studied Tai Chi. We looked at different cultural influences like Barong and Legong from Indonesia, sorry, Bali, and Japanese no theatre, and kabuki, bunraku, the puppetry as well. So it was we kind of it was a very broad education, but there was a lot of physical work in it as well. Um, I personally was interested in dance, and so I went to uh, dance classes of my own volition. And there were opportunities to sing with the university choir, which I took as well. So always kept the various, and I played instruments as well. I played a variety of Renaissance and Baroque instruments, shawms, crumhorns, bagpipes, lowland bagpipes, not the highland pipes that you think of from Scotland, and various recorders and flutes and things. And again, that actually carried on into my work. I spent a lot of time playing music in shows.
And socially, like how was it being in Hull? How was
It was great. I mean, it was back in the early '80s, and I was there the same year as Ben Watt and Tracy Thorn and Everything But the Girl, and Ben was in the same drama course as me, and it was great. We in your first year you stayed in university accommodation, and then you were encouraged to either go into halls or go private. I went private and set up in a sort of commune with a we it was two or three houses that all lived in one little street, and we all kind of clubbed together and decided we'd be vegetarian, and we would buy our food from a cooperative whole food supplier. So that meant for great communal living, it meant that I could eke out our student grants as a little bit further. So it was fine. It was a great place to be.
um, between I guess between Everything But the Girl and your first viewing of the Border Crossings 12th Night? Um, what happened in those intervening years?
Wow, golly, that's a heck of a lot to cover. You're talking about 20 years. Well, basically, when I left Hull, I was offered. I'd gone up to Edinburgh for the festival a couple of times with student productions, and whilst working up there, I met someone who worked at the King's Theatre in Edinburgh, and they said, "Would would you like to work backstage with us? We need stage crew." Because I'd helped them do the lighting for a fringe show, and because I was quite, as I say, I was always very good with my hands and did all the sort of backstage stuff as well as performing. And so as soon as I left Hull, I was offered this job at the King's Theatre as stage crew doing Alex, but also as prop assistant to they always did a big panto there every year. It's a huge thing in Scotland, and it would run for about 2 months, and so they needed someone to do the props and the set detail. And so I got that job. One thing led to another. I did various design work, worked with other theatre companies, Scottish Theatre Company, um, the Lyceum, and then at that point I met my life partner, and we after 4 years in Edinburgh we moved up to Aberdeen and lived there for 2 years. But there was no work for me in Aberdeen in the theatre world. I would have to carry on working down at in Edinburgh or Dundee, or so it was because there was no residential theatre in Aberdeen. And also, all this time at the back of my on my back burner was the fact that I trained and wanted to be a performer. That was what had always been my goal. So I answered an advert at the back of the stage looking for puppeteers to work on Button Moon, the stage show, and I was called down to London for an audition, which I went to, and I got the job, and I toured for 9 months, and that made some great friends on that, who we're still in touch with today, and we all stay in touch with each other. And then from Button Moon, I moved on to doing theatre and education with various theatre companies, and doing a lot of fringe theatre around London, trying to get a toe on the ladder. And then I got an opportunity to work with the BBC Radio Drama Company. I was on the audio, which is radio drama, for a year's contract, and which was just the most extraordinary opportunity because you're working next to some of the greatest, actors in the business. So seeing them close to working, and that was a real education. I mean, not to say that I hadn't had one at Hull, but I mean, I think any student will tell you that no matter how well you are trained or your studying goes at college, the first 3 months of actually out working, doing the job, teaches you more in some ways than those 3 years of prep. And anyway, so from the radio drama company, I then subsequently went to work with the Royal Shakespeare Company in a production of Patriot for me, playing Ferdy, the operatic soprano. And that led to working with ANBC, with Greg Thompson, who's a wonderful director, and we toured of various shows, but the most memorable being a production of The Tempest, which toured all over the world with the British Council. And we went to Trinidad, Hong Kong, um, all over Europe, Poland, Czech Republic, Russia, Romania, Poland, Milton Keynes. Yeah, we got everywhere. and then I met Michael, and I think it was on the 12th Night. And I had actually been in 2 productions of 12th Night already by that time. I played Feste in one and Malvolio in another. The Feste was at the Country Belgrade, and the Malvolio was touring with a company called New Triad, who toured all over Europe, and that was great fun. So I kind of knew the play very well, and I think they'd already done a leg of the tour, and some of the cast members had other commitments, and so they were recasting for the role of Feste. And I can't remember how the connection came about, but someone passed my name on to Michael, and he called me for an audition.
It was Vivienne Rochester.
Vivian Rochester, of course, that's right. Yes, she and I were on the radio drama company together, and yeah, I forgot, of course, Viv, yeah. And so yes, she and I had been in 12th Night together. She'd played Mariah, and I'd played Feste at Coventry, but also we'd been on the radio drama company together. And then Viv was playing, I think she played Olivia in 12th Night, and in Michael's production. And so when they were looking for someone, she said, "Well, there's this guy I know," and so she got me an audition, and that was that. And I toured the Zimbabwe leg of the 12th Night tour.
So you've been recommended by a friend to join this new production, and and you knew that it was going to go to Zimbabwe. Had you been to Zimbabwe prior to that production?
Never been to Africa at that stage. No.
So what do you remember about, like, being contacted and
Oh, I was very excited, and went and gave an audition, sang and played the flute, and obviously Michael liked what he saw, and it was being assistant directed by another lady whose name I'm afraid I can't remember, who she stepped in because Michael had other commitments. He was doing other projects, and so she took it over. Michael had done all the setup and the arrangements, and we rehearsed in London. And it was the reason the production was so notable is that in a sort of quite deliberate reversal on Michael's part, all the high status characters were played by black actors. The middle strata, the middle class, the sort of executive, like people like Malvolio, Mariah, and so on, were played by Asian actors from India, and all the sort of lower class and disruptive characters were all played by white actors, and it was a deliberate sort of reversal of the accepted social. Uh, and I think that's why it was chosen to go to Zimbabwe, because it was quite significant that all the nobility were played by black actors, and it sort of played with that reversal politically. And we were there as the sort of the cultural arm of a diplomatic visit to Zim.
had you worked with many people of color up to that point in your career, would you say?
In a sort of passing way, not specifically. On the radio drama company, you worked with all sorts. I mean, all actors from Asians, Irish, Scottish, French, uh, there were productions. I remember there was a production of White Sargasso Sea, and Eartha Kitt came into the studio and was working on that. And all the cast were Caribbean, and members of the white members of the company were asked, "Can you do a Barbadian or Caribbean accent?" We were like, "Is that okay?" And then we were coached because actually um, white Barbadians and Caribbean residents also have that beautiful musical accent, and so we were coached by them to do it accurately and not send it up, which was a huge privilege. Um, it was yeah, it was so yeah that was that. I mean, actors would just work with each other. You don't really see skin color. It's it's about whether or not a person can play a part and or what they bring to a part. And I mean, Michael was deliberately, I think, making a political point, but nonetheless, the actors were the best actors for the job, and they were all fantastic.
What was the devising or the it was a remount, is that right?
Yes, I mean, I was being slotted in because the actor who'd originally played the Feste role had got other work, and so I um, was sort of drafted in, and they sort of did a re. I think we had about 2 weeks in a rehearsal studio somewhere in London. Can't remember where that was now, but and we just rehearsed everybody in because they'd had a bit of a time off from the tour. And I think also at that point there was a cast change as well because I think at that point Viv was also stepping down, and that's when Joy Richardson came up and she took over the part of Olivia, and Will. Oh gosh, is it Will? Will, I can't remember the guy who played Orsino. He was also drafted in as well. Will, what's his surname? I can see his face as clear as day, but I'm terrible with names, so you're going to get this a lot, I'm afraid. I'm in my early senility. I can't remember people's names at all. But he was absolutely wonderful, as terrifying as Orsino. He was so the passions were so raw and visceral that actually he became quite frightening.
Sorry. Um, the uh, did it feel like a standard prep for a show in the lead up to going to Zimbabwe, or was it different in any way?
Um, yes, I mean, it was more exotic in terms of, I mean, in the productions I'd done before, they'd been very sort of what you'd expect white middle class productions to be, really. Um, you know, so it was in the sense that there was this cultural mix. It was very interesting to kind of see why that was done. I remember um, a wonderful actress playing Mariah Harvey Vierdy, who has obviously gone on to be in Hollywood Oaks and so on. And she was just fantastic. And then I think what was happening is that Michael had encouraged in the original production that people to lean on their cultural heritage in the playing of their characters, um, because there was something in that. There was often if you think of the colonial history of Britain and our background, um, the the bureaucrats and the bureaucracy has been handed on to others who are trained into the British mindset for the empire's greater good. And so actually having uh, Indian actors playing the middle level bureaucrats made perfect sense because that's very much what happened in India and Africa. We moved people around the world, and so there was hence some of the political upheaval in Africa where huge amounts of Asian bureaucrats were kicked out by certainly in oh what is it oh can't remember, see me in my memory. But in the 70s and 80s, there were huge, amounts of people being kicked out by the new powers that have taken over the ex-colonial um, bodies. So yeah, that's the legacy of colonization, sadly.
I'm going to ask you just about the the experience of going to Zimbabwe. So um, you went to the airport, presumably. You got on a plane and you landed, and how was
There was
that?
no specific allowance for costumes and so on, so we actually had to take all our own costumes in as part of our own luggage. And so we all flew out together, which was very exciting. It always is when you go on tour with companies, and you kind of, you bond over a coffee in the departure lounge, and the excitement of going to another country, being given Zimbabwean money to spend when we arrived in our per diems and stuff, and then arriving in such a different climate. The humidity of the air, the warmth of the air, that sort of liquid warmth of the air around you, and the colors, of course, the different colors of the earth and the plants and the sky. Everything's much more vivid because the um, the sky is bluer, the earth is red. And Zimbabwe, of course, is or was, an incredibly fecund country. It was the breadbasket of Africa. There was no obvious poverty, though it was signs of it were beginning to show when we arrived, sadly. But yeah, no, it was a real kind of culture shock. Um, and we had incidents. I mean, we were actually one of the most extraordinary things that that's just suddenly popped back into my head. Arriving at Harare Airport, I was stopped at passport control by a young woman, and she said, "What's the purpose of your visit?" I said, "I'm here. I'm working with a production of *Twelfth Night." And she said, "Oh, I've got tickets to see it." I said, "Oh, wow, fantastic." She said, "What character are you playing?" And I said, "I'm playing Feste." And she quoted my lines to me. I couldn't imagine that at Heathrow, I have to say. But yeah, she knew her Shakespeare, and she quoted my lines back at me, which was just astonishing. And there was a lot of excitement by people who wanted to come and see the show, and there was a real buzz and anticipation about it.
Do you remember the first performance or the do you remember like
We had a rehearsal period in I think it was the Savannah Arts Theatre, or the Seven Arts Theatre, something I can't remember. It's all merging now. But we had a rehearsal period in the theatre before we opened, and um, there was a huge delegation had come in from, um, as I said, we were part of a diplomatic visit, and so there were representatives from the um, uh, the British government and British Diplomatic Corps, and members of the government. The head of the Minister for Arts from Zimbabwe was there. We were presented to him afterwards, um, and it. Yeah, so I'm rendering. It's very. I'm sort of remembering details of the production now. One of the big differences, and again, one of the things that Michael and Border Crossings have always done is they blend cultural elements. And whilst we had um, Afro-Caribbean actors, Asian actors, and um, British white ethnic actors, um, the cultural basis we were working on was almost like a no theatre system where the whole cast was on stage the entire time, and there was a sort of a painted square area which, when you entered that, you were on stage. When you weren't on that, you sat at the side. And you stood up to go on and enter the scenes. There was no scenery as such, apart from maybe an odd chair here or there taken on or off, taken on or off. It was, and yes, I'd completely forgotten that. So yes, that's in comparison to the rather traditional productions I'd done previously. This was very much taking from an Eastern Oriental um, uh, cultural dynamic, because Michael loves to bash different cultures into each other to see what happens, where the explosions lie, if any. And certainly with some of the other projects we worked on, that was much more to the fore.
do you remember the tour um, I guess progressing and heading back to the UK?
Very much. We from Harare, we then travelled down to Bulawayo, which is the most beautiful city, absolutely beautiful city, and performed there. And whilst we were there, part of again, it's part of the remit is that we would get involved in cross-cultural educational events. So we worked with African dancers and artists and performers doing workshops, and they were teaching us dances and songs which I can still remember. I've never forgotten, and then
Can I ask?
yeah, sure.
If
Abalalanga, ababalanga bahababasuko, abalalang, mfazilundoka, abalalanga bahababasuko, abalalang, abalalanga bahababasuko, abalalang. Never forgotten.
did you get
Just
a translation or did you just get
I
the
was
original?
told it was a good luck song, night before a wedding. You would sing this song, and it would be to sort of clear the air of any negative energy or whatever. The night before a wedding. That's I don't know the exact wording. But I mean, we taught dances and dance moves as well. What we shared as from a Western perspective, British perspective, was we did comedy improv technique with them, which they really enjoyed and really latched onto and kind of went, yeah, oh yeah, we like where this is going. So we played various improv games and shared that. And I did some singing. I sort of was doing Baroque singing, which actually was more in later projects, but for the Zimbabwe project, it was there'd been music specially written, which I'd had to learn, and I played the flute and whistle, which is a flute I'd bought in India 10 years previously, and so it was again. Michael liked that fusion of different cultures into the production. So yeah, from Bulawayo, we had a few days off, and so several of us took the train from Bulawayo down to Victoria Falls, and we spent a long weekend at Victoria Falls. We rented a cottage and took a cruise on the Zambezi and went over to Botswana and went on a mini safari, a boat safari in Botswana, and then travelled back up to Bulawayo, and then those that wanted to extended their ticket, and I teamed up with Joy Richardson, and the two of us toured around the country together. We went to Masvingo, which is Great Zimbabwe, the incredible ruins of an earlier civilization, and then back to Harare, where having been fated guests when we arrived, we were now just two people who were in Harare, hadn't got a hotel room, and couldn't really afford one. But we we knew that the hotel that we had been put up in Harare had a swimming pool on the roof, and so we went in and of course, I'm afraid it has to be said, white faces walking in, although obviously Joy is Ghanaian, but we walked in and we just acted like Westerners, like we owned the place, and we went upstairs saying, "Oh yes, we're resident West, we're using the swimming pool." We went up and we used the shower facilities so we could have a shower because we've been on the road for about a week, staying at various sort of hotels and stuff. And our last 2 nights we'd stayed with Albert Niati, who was a poet who was uh, had been one of the organising committee for this artistic event that we were on. So we stayed with Albert and his wife and family, and they had a power cut and the water cut off, so we had no facilities for cleaning before going on an airplane. So that's why we borrowed the hotel and used their shower on the roof in order to get ourselves clean for flying back to London. But
Were there any traces kind of detectable in your bearing, in your practice following that experience, do you think?
well, I borrowed elements for other projects. There was a company I worked with called the Lions Part, who do pageants on the South Bank, and they do other historical events and projects around the country. But they do kind of sort of recreations of Baroque or Renaissance music events and so on. But their event on the South Bank Um, I've been taught a dance. This is actually from the Orientations project, but we've been taught a series of dance steps by Radhakrishna Urula, who is the temple dancer we were working with. And I then combined that into playing a dragon demon in a mummers play, so which is a very traditional European form of playing from the late medieval period. And into this mummers play, I put a dragon that danced Yakshagana steps as because it was a huge costume. It was a massive wickerwork frame, which reminded me very much of the style of some of the costumes that we saw when we were in India. So yes, cultural crossover was very useful, and it's fascinating to utilize that.
So a few years go by, and then you join border crossings for MAPPA Mundi.
That was what Michael had put something together. Again, I won't be able to give you names because it's so long ago. But a friend of his had a property down on the edge of uh, some woodland down near Tewkesbury Way or somewhere like that. I think it's very close to Tinton Abbey. That's what I remember. And they built a stage area out in on the edge of this woodland. So we were out in the middle of nowhere, and we explored the issues of. I mean, at Mappa Mundi, the sort of the thrust of the project was to look at how does a map create cultural identity? What is the power of a map? And the Mappa Mundi is one of the first great maps, and it's Michael had always been fascinated by it because it's kept in Hereford because he grew up in Hereford, and so we took the concept of you know how do you define cultural identity and do map what is the colonial power of a map? What does a map do? Does it divide or does it unite? What does it? And so we were kind of kicking those ideas around. And again, it was a real cross-cultural mix. We had an actress who was half Chinese, half Japanese. We had a Brazilian actor. We had an actor from Africa. We had a dancer from India who was also a very fine actress. And so he just got us all together to just improvise around ideas and talk about cultural identity, really. And so we were all swapping stories about our family history going back. What was our connection with maps? How did we see maps? How did we? Um, and then Michael put together various scenarios based upon the things that came up in discussion, so that when we went to this woodland staging area, we would improvise using different music. I would play Renaissance music. Lafati Haramedi, the actor from Africa, he brought African drums, and so we had drumming. The young chap from Brazil, whose name has completely gone out of my head, I'm afraid.
Would you like me to read the names for you?
Oh yes, if you could, that would be great.
I may be saying them wrong. I have Nisha Dasin or Dasin.
Nisha Desai,
Nisha.
yeah.
Mauricio
Yes.
Eloriaje.
Loriaga, that's the young. He was the young Brazilian.
Yeah. I think
Lafati
according to
Haramedi.
this, we have Mexico. Just to say, that's all right. That's
Sorry,
okay.
I saw Mexico.
He
Yes,
might
it
be
is
mixed
Mexico. It
heritage.
is Mexico.
We have Anjali J from India.
And Anjali
Anjali.
Jaidev, yeah, yeah. She was a Kathak dancer
Wow.
from Bangalore.
Veronica Nida.
Um, that's right. So it was a quite a complex group, and we were all sort of throwing in ideas and performing on the edge of the forest. I do remember one time we were rehearsing a particular sequence which involved a lot of drumming from Mifati, and suddenly these two frightfully British ladies on very large horses pulled up in the woodland and said, "What on earth are you doing?" Michael very kind of building towards something, and they really kind of killed the mood. And Michael very crossly said, "We're working. Go away." I think they were probably their farmland butted onto this wood. I have no idea, but they were just like, "What the hell is this going on in the middle of our woods?" But it was it was fascinating. I mean, basically, we were kind of just kicking around ideas and using the history of the old Mappa Mundi. And I mean, I wasn't able to do the actual performance of it. I was purely just part of the development team, and we were swapping stories and trying to find equivalent stories. And I think this is something that seems to be a theme with Michael's work, is taking cultural, specifically cultural stories that are perhaps apparently specific to one demographic, but actually, when you start to dig, you find that actually it's human. The demographic is human. It's not black, white, Chinese. It's not Brazilian, French, German. It's human. And that, I think, if you were to distill it down, is probably what Border Crossings work is about. It's about exploring our common humanity, not our differences.
How did it? Do you remember how it felt to be there, to be working together?
It, we were there for about, in my memory, it's about 3 weeks. Perhaps it was less than that. I don't know. But we spent a long. They were very tiring days because we spent some time learning different dance work from each other, learning different music, um, and then improvising around scenarios that Mike created for us. And then one day we actually did a live filming event at Tinton Abbey, where one of the characters that had slowly emerged during the course of this development work was the I think he was known as the map maker or something. I don't think he's based on a real figure. He's because no one knows. I may be wrong here, but this is me trying to pull it back. But I don't think anyone actually knows who drew the Mappa Mundi. I think it was just the unknown figure. And so Michael created this character based on it. Maybe he was known, or maybe we did know his name. I can't remember it. But so I was sort of improvising this character, and it was fascinating because um, it was an open day. It was the I think it's English Heritage look after the property, and so there were guests, there were visitors, just ordinary people there going, "What the heck is going on here?" Because there was this bunch of actors being followed around with a man with a camera, improvising madly anything that came into our heads that seemed relevant to the story we were trying to create. We didn't really know what the story was. We were finding the story through the improvisations and the development work. So Lord alone knows what the people who were there made of it. But we drew quite a crowd out of that. And it was, yeah, no, it was fascinating.
Did you ever go? Did you ever attend a performance? Were you able to?
I don't think I could, no, because I'd got another tour which was going off to America, I think. I think it was a production of St. Joan, and so I couldn't do the performances because I was going off to the States. Um, but so no, I don't remember seeing a performance of it.
A number of years go by, about 3 or 4, and there's the orientations project. This is the last project we'll talk about. Do you remember the sort of intervening time in the lead up to orientations, like how you heard about it or were contacted for it?
Well, I think it's something that it had probably come up in conversation with Michael in the past because although he'd utilised my countertenor in Twelfth Night. Michael, of course, also worked for E&O and was constantly surrounded by superb musicians with fantastic voices. And he wanted to do something with the countertenor voice. And so he was looking at Indian myth, and particularly through the form of Yakshagana, which is a dance form from Karnataka. And he was interested in, he wanted to play with gender and why is a deep voice considered a masculine voice and a high voice considered a feminine voice, given that we have countertenors? And he was also looking at the history of castrati and in the form of dance that Radha Krishna specialized in, Yakshagana. It is a purely male dance form. Girls are allowed to do it up to the age of puberty, and then they have to stop because it's a temple thing, it's a sacred thing, it's not entertainment as such, it is very much a spiritual thing. And they dance stories from the Mahabharata. and uh, and uh, uh, and but Radhakrishna was a specialist in dancing the female roles, and so as a young man he'd done his training, and uh, I've got photographs of extraordinary. Michael did a photo shoot with Rajat. We were on a roof in India. We'd gone to India, and we were working in a wonderful arts centre that had been set up by I can't remember the Indian playwright whose name's completely just escaped me. But he had this arts centre in downtown Bangalore, and we were put up in a council apartment, and we would travel by tuk-tuk every morning to this wonderful art centre, which had a rehearsal room and a space where we improvised and we told stories, cultural stories, and there was Adil who'd come down from Delhi, Radhakrishna. Was Anjali involved at this stage? I can't remember if Anjali was in this. Don't think she was. Um, but and we swapped stories, and what we ended up with was we took a Baroque aria, which from a story very similar to a story about gender manipulation coming from um, the Mahabharata. Oh, we had a wonderful storyteller from Chennai, um, and oh God, name names, and and so we were getting stories from the Mahabharata and more contemporary modern tales. This storyteller had worked with the Hijra community in India, and so she was Pritam Chakrabarti, I remember, and she was giving us a slightly more contemporary twist, and so we developed a story based out of this about someone kind of lost in their gender, whether they weren't sure if they were gay, whether they were transgender. And the permissibility of it. In what cultures is it okay to be gay? What cultures is it okay to be transgender? What yeah, and so it was very emotive, and it was a very exciting thing to be a part of. Um, Juxtapose it. I can remember there was a scene where Pritam told a story taken from the Mahabharata. Radhakrishna danced a transformations scene from one of his, where uh, the god transforms himself into a woman in order to seduce one of his foes. And I sang this aria as a countertenor. So you had this male high voice, this person changing gender in front of you, which Radhakrishna did beautifully. He basically dressed himself in sari and put on, and it was just so beautiful to watch. And Pritam telling this story as we worked, and the silk of the sari kind of was like flowed like blood or water or whatever you wanted it to represent. Where it was very very powerful. Um, and I remember when we went to Radhakrishna invited us to his family home in Bangalore, where we were introduced to his wife and his parents and his brothers and his children. He had two. I think he had a baby son and a little daughter at that point. And they showed us their wedding pictures. And because what Radhakrishna does was a sacred act, he danced the Parvati, the goddess Parvati, as part of his wedding ceremony. So in their wedding photographs, both he and his wife are wearing saris, which is just so mind bending. It's fantastic. But it was a spiritual thing. It wasn't considered odd because he was a professional temple dancer, so he was giving praise to Parvati to bless their wedding.
Do you remember performing the work? In...
Yeah, we came back to Britain, and we rehearsed for a while at the Waterman's Art Centre, where we then gave the first performances of the play that was created. And yes, one of the things that sticks in my mind is that at the time at the theatre there was a restaurant that was run by an Indian family doing South Indian food, and there were these South Indian actors who'd come over and who were because the the pound goes a lot well certainly back then went a long way in India at the time, and so they were getting paid British wages, but the proprietor of the restaurant, having chatted to them and found out what they were doing and why they were there, said, "I can't charge you British rates for this. I know how much this money means to you and your families back home." So he basically charged us for the duration of our stay. He only charged us the we would have paid were we were in India, which was a very kind and generous gesture, and it certainly helped the Indian contingent take a bit of cash home with them, which was good. But it was yeah, the play. I think people weren't quite sure what to make of it. It was very it was challenging, and I think we had hoped that it would tour India, but I think the Indian arts authorities went, "This is too much. It's too specific." The open discussion of homosexuality and um, gender politics and talking about hijra, even just talking about it at that time was, even though there was a senior politician, a hijra politician in India at the time, it was still considered too sensitive a topic for us to tour um, in India. So that leg of the tour never happened. But yeah, it got a very mixed reception because I think people were, as with a lot of that of devised work, it was a curate's egg. It had the seeds of some extraordinary ideas, most of which had come from Michael, just about the smushing together of different cultural identities, and also what had to be a theatrical first, that he had a lesbian scene in the play, or where two women. Uh, it didn't go into any graphic detail, but it was clearly there was a homoerotic power in the scene between two women, and by sheer coincidence, they were both pregnant at the time, the actresses. So that's for two actresses pregnant playing a homoerotic love scene on stage. It's got to be a theatrical coup. It can't be that. I can't. I don't think anyone else has ever done that. Michael was quietly very proud of that, I think.
You created a role for that work. You created the role of Julian Lucas. Do you remember that?
That's correct.
And
Yes. Yeah.
what was the process like of creating that role?
Well, we did various improvisations about. We were looking a lot at colonialism as well, and about the entitlement that certain characters have when in a ex-colonial position. And we decided that to facilitate the play, this character was a particularly arrogant, um, self-preening um, idiot, really. Um, but he had a very twisted relationship with his wife and daughter, and yeah, the character. I mean, I only did the first development phase. The show then went on to do two more sort of chapters, if you like, where the characters went further and further and got even more complicated. But we sort of established through improvisation that for this character to facilitate the drama, he needed to be of a certain character, which was I would say opportunistic, controlling, um, and massively judgmental. So it's quite sort of fun to kind of build a character like that. And again, we were using modern technology. Again, Michael loves to do this, and then in the later iterations of the show, he used the technology because I'm a techno dweeb, I'm terrible with technology, but Michael loved to experiment and play, and so he was mixing. The title of the company kind of tells you everything. Border crossings. He constantly is juxtapose cultural ideas, state, theatrical devices, using camera work, so having a screen, actors being filmed whilst they're performing. So you get close-ups of things that are happening on stage behind the actor. I mean, he was always constantly playing with that sort of idea. But I can remember there was a particular improvisation. There's a story from the Mahabharata about the king he has seven faces or something like that, and he it's so that he could watch his daughters constantly. And so, taking that idea of the older spying man, we kind of used taking one. We It just came in an improvisation. I thought, well, why don't I take a photograph of my daughter while she's asleep? And it's like having the seven faces of the king watching, and so on. And that, I think Michael then kind of ran with that and created more. He kind of looked at that. It was just one of those things that came up through improvisation. Um, so yeah, it was a fascinating project, and the other people we got to work with. I mean, Adil Hussein is now, well, he's an international movie star. Um, and it was just a real privilege to share space with him, and all the others as well. Everyone with Pritam Chakravarti, who's actually still lectures, goes tours around India, teaches about writing and storytelling, and how to get a story out onto the page. Um, and Nisha, who is an incredibly talented painter as well as a fine actress. So it was great to just be in a room with people who you could relax enough. I mean, because of the nature of the material we were working on, um, it led to great sensitivity. We had to be open. You had to be completely honest. I remember it didn't. There was some when we came to do the show in Britain. Adil was fine. He'd worked with us in India. He completely the first iteration of the show. Um, everything we did in India, we'd explored together. He worked on. We had huge problems recasting that role because it required two men kissing. It required and the a lot of the young Indian actors that we auditioned for it, because Michael included me in the audition process, kind of freaked out when they found out they actually had to kiss, and it was very uncomfortable and awkward. It was it became that. Well, I can remember it was an issue, and it was like, well, did they? I mean, we're talking, it's what, 20 years ago. I think things have moved on since, but it was still a thing 20 years ago. Do you want to be known as a gay actor? Do you want to be known as someone who kisses another man on stage? So it was problematic and difficult, and it was dealt with incredibly sensitively. I mean, Michael, we laid our hearts open. You have to with that kind of work. So it was. Yeah, and I remember bizarrely while we were on tour in Oxford of all places with the second production, one of the actors was gay bashed. Whilst we were he was some guys just set on him, and that was, given the nature of what we were touring, it was hugely distressing. The whole company were just appalled because he was one of the sweetest people you ever met, a very kind, gentle person, and that someone could do that to someone so sweet was just horrific. We were all really shaken when it happened.
How, yeah, like, were there ever any other similar, I don't know, was there a climate of I don't know, of fear or, I don't know.
Not really. I mean, as actors, you kind of part of the contract of being an actor is that you're open to whatever comes your way. You sort of, so I don't think it was an issue per se between us as a company. But when one of your members is assaulted just for being who they are, then that is pretty sick making.
Do you do you remember the final performance of it? Do you remember the closing?
Gosh, No, then. Well, I went to see the subsequent iterations that Michael did. He did because there was a whole bunch of stuff. He moved the location to Sweden. So the first play was set in India and the UK, I think, and then the second installment with the story developing with the discovery of Lucas's daughter and his relationship with his estranged wife. Um, Michael, the other actor he worked with, who's again I can't remember his name, they took it in a very different direction, and it was. I went to see it. It was at Goldsmiths College in London, I think, and they'd moved to Sweden and they'd done similar work with improvisation to create a script and a storyline. And it got very dark. It was it was very powerful. I remember.
Is there anything that you would have liked me to have asked
I'm trying to
that I
think.
haven't?
I'm sure 20 questions will occur to me as soon as we stop. Not really. I mean, it was an opportunity to explore and uh, do creative work in a collaborative environment. That those opportunities don't actually that often come along. It depends on the nature of the work you do. I mean, I most of my work was in physical theatre before I settled into audio, which is what I mainly do now. And so having opportunities to explore extraordinary cultural diversity and to use all of your skills, to learn skills, learn dancers, to learn songs, to share ideas and just bounce off each other was was amazing. You don't get those opportunities very often. So yes, it was a very rich, and as I said earlier, it does. I was able to take some of those skills and things that I learned and introduce them into other work that I did. I mean, in fact, for instance, when we were in Zimbabwe with Twelfth Night, I learned to play the mbira, which is a beautiful thumb piano from Zimbabwe, and I bought one from Lifati Hadamedi whilst we were there, and I he taught me various tunes on it, and I kind of improvised around them. And then 10 years later, whatever it was, I was doing this production of The Tempest that went all over the place. And I said, in this production, everybody played Ariel. And the point at which the characters are sent to sleep by the spirit of Ariel, I would play this instrument because it's got a very slightly ethereal, delicate sound. And as the performance took place in the audience, I was walking through. So basically, I was able to bring something that I'd learned on a production with Michael 8 or however many years previously, bring it into this totally different production, a totally different set of rules and environment. It was a classic, production of a Shakespeare play. So yes, the cultural borrowings that it had allowed me to use were useful in other contexts.
Yeah, some really really wonderful stories here. Yeah, I feel like I've been to those places and I've seen those sites and heard some of the music even as well. So thank you very much, Peter, and yeah, until next time. See ya.
Really great pleasure.